Lazarus is the story of Calliope Bird Morath, who at 21 years old becomes the most famous poet in American history, but not because of not on the strength of her poetry, but mostly by virtue of her parentage. Her father was a colossally famous punk rocker in the early 90s named Brant Morath, who was the head of a punk outfit out of San Diego called Terrible Children, and he sort of took over the world and then killed himself in front of his infant daughter when she was 4. And Calliope's mother was also in a rock band, a sort of an early 90s like riot girl band called Fuck Finn. Her mother's name is Penny Power, or Penelope, but her stage name is Penny Power. Anyway, the novel's mostly about Calliope's rise as a poet and about her father's career and his death, but this is a section where she talks about her mother. And so, what of my suffering mother? You must want to know about her. Penny Power, the bereaved, Penny the terrifying, Penny the aggrieved. No account would be complete without a close-up of her face. I want you to picture poor Penelope, trapped in the Ithaca of her rock and roll fantasy, waiting stone-faced for an impossible return. And I, just a pathetic Telemachus, bloodied at my father's hand, had no gift to ease her days, not a single consolatory word. Who was left to watch over her? Who would hold her elbow, shrieve her soul? Who would lift the albatross from her shoulders, the collateral damage from a vagrant's undiscriminating bow? You've seen her on your television, you've seen her in your fashion magazines, but these don't tell of the long vigil on the windy widow's walk, the distant sliver of ocean on which she rested her bloodshot hopes. They don't convey the babble of lawyers and VPs, the police, producers and debtors, the deluge of claims against him, the groupies who swore to God they'd bedded him and were carrying his true heirs, bonds against concert cancellations in Oslo, Krakow, Sydney, Rotterdam, the dealers with their cocaine noses, skinny-tied Shylocks demanding their pound of meat, 108 suitors with pens and tape recorders hurling themselves into her moat. What would you have had her do, O disapproving one? Don her best sari, make herself pretty, lie down at his side in useless punk rock sooty? Then you don't know my mother. You think you've seen her, do you? You think that what you read is true? That photos with Hugh Hefner, with Bono and Harvey Keitel, mugshots and gold records can explain this belle in all her complexity? At long last, sir, have you no sense of your own gullibility? Are you interested in what really is? Would you like to try a little quiz? True or false? Penny Power was born in Detroit in the summer of love, the illegitimate offspring of a groupie and the drummer of the MC5. False, you fool, you're already failing. They made that one up for the liner notes of Fuck Finn's first EP. Not bad for a couple of girls with no marketing degree. Number 2, still having fun? Her mother never told her the secret of her paternity, saving that factoid for the night of her sweet 16. She spent her adolescence praying to the gods of rock, Iggy and the Stooges, the Dolls, the Thin White Duke, and yes, the Motor City's dissonant quintet. All adorned her walls, all watched over her restless futon nights, her backstage dreams, her slippery thighs, until the night of her birthday when a leather-clad Leviathan stepped through the front door. Your father, said Grandma, and my mother just gaped, recognized his face from the poster above her bed, the curled lip, the dark eyes that had presided over sweaty fantasies. Daughter, he smiled, and Penelope fled, packed a bag, smashed her piggy bank. By sunrise, she'd made Chicago, by the next night, Cedar Falls, hitchhiked her way to a West Coast destiny, holing up at a New Mexico nunnery before arriving at the beach with only the clothes on her back. This story, you say, has got to be true. It fits so well with the face, the songs, it has its own logic. How could it be wrong? Ah, but it is. Despite your surprise, sorry to tell you, bub, you're 0 for 2. But what about the speed addiction? The psychotic episode? The year in juvenile detention? Strikes 3, 4, and 5, you're out, and then some. But surely she had an affair with Kim Gordon. That's how she learned to play the bass. Surely she lived in a Tijuana brothel, charging 50 pesos just to look at her face. No, and no again, mon cher, really, I'm surprised. Can't you tell when you're being conned? When the machine is manufacturing a star right before your eyes? Listen closely now, if you choose, I'll whisper in your ear. She grew up in New Jersey. Middle-class suburbs, braces, JV tennis, the whole bit. Daddy's little favorite, groomed for the Ivy League, stealing off to New York on school nights to hear Blondie and the Ramones, smoking pot in Washington Square with her giggling girlfriends, then off to Yale, where she majored in drama, had her first real boyfriend, a doctor's son, from Brookline. My friends, am I boring you yet? She could have gone on to do anything, law school, med school, family connections on Broadway, but mousy Penelope bought a ticket with her graduation check, and when the plane landed in San Diego, out stepped Penny Power, parentless miracle of self-invention, a fright to behold. Oh, my beautiful Gorgon, how you blazed a trail through the beach clubs and the biker bars, walked the streets with a bass strapped to your back, singing your tentative first songs while sitting on some Hell's Angel's lap. Shameless, they called you. And maybe you were, strutting around in a bikini, showing off your assets to frat boys on Pacific Beach, inviting them to your coffeehouse gigs with a bat of your eyelashes and a cock of your hips. They came by the hundreds, to the Interchange, to Ground Zero, to Java Joe's, the tiny rooms overflowing for every acoustic Thursday show. Aha, you think, my vigilant ones. Now this is the Penny I love and know. She'd start out sweetly, just a girl and her axe, her voice a melancholy whisper over the thrum and the slap, building and deepening, drawing the room in as she stood from her stool and bared her teeth, a howl that seemed to come from somewhere else, a dark planet called pain. Soon she was flat on her back, thrusting her hips, writhing across the stage, everyone paralyzed, swept up and whirling in the funnel cloud of her rage. Week after week, they watched her pour out her fury, mesmerized by her spotlit catharses, red-faced, wailing. She rubbed her fingers raw on the strings. In the front row, they could feel the heat radiating from her body, the waves of desperation when she stepped up to sing. And though she was beautiful, everyone said so, tall and raven-haired, gray eyes, a model's proud bearing, they all felt they knew her. They felt she was speaking to their most private, aching fears when she sang what would become her anthem, a little ditty you might recall, called Ugly Like Me. We're going to transform the world, she told the slack-jawed crowd. Her set finished, she stood dripping in sweat, t-shirt torn and sticking to her chest, her face streaked with tears and snot. The hushed room trembled in joy and a palpable terror that the soul-splitting howl they'd been holding inside might find its way out, that this self-loathing they'd carried around might one day prove the mark of their worth. You don't believe me, said Teaneck's erstwhile most likely to, the victim of some profound, hollowing grief. But it's all going to turn upside down, she told them. People like us can be happy. People like you and me are allowed to be happy. Then she hid her face in her hands and sobbed, shoulders heaving, reflections from her base shooting prisms of light over their mute faces. Every boy and girl, every man and woman in the room wanted to put their arms around her and take her home. And who is that skinny kid, crushed against the back wall, his weak heart pounding with love? He would go to her now if he weren't frightened to death, pinned by the elbows of the newly converted. Who is that unshaved waif, waiting for a signal all these years, singing his songs to the homeless and the bent, cutting his skin with an X-Acto knife? Imagine the shock when he sees his reflection. Imagine what goes through his head as she looks up and hiccups the manifesto of the new revolution. Fuck the beautiful, she said. Well, my astute little punk devotees, you think you know all the rest, how she found 3 more losers and called them Fuck Finn, how they sailed across the San Diego skies and landed at the top of the Casbah heap, the local record companies squabbling to put out their EP, how she finally met Brandt in the back room one night 2 years after he'd first laid eyes, how they married 6 months later, her belly not yet swelling, the car crash in Ensenada on the way to the honeymoon. Steadily they waged war on the mainstream, my mother always the brains and the drive, working her contacts, seducing booking agents, buttonholing producers and critics alike. Where would he have been without her, that shy kid with the soggy bedroll, that angelic delinquent with his pocket Rimbaud? When self-doubt overcame him and he reached for a drink, who smoothed his forehead? Who kissed his eyelids? Who rubbed his tired shoulders and lit his cigarette? When his lyrics rang trite, his chord progression stillborn, who picked up the guitar and said, how about a B flat? All their best songs might never have been written without her intervention. She had a dream, she could see the future, and nothing was going to prevent its realization, not even herself. No one will ever know what your love and belief mean to me, he muttered into the microphone at the MTV Awards. Fidgeting like a fifth grader in his pink tuxedo, his bandmates jostling each other behind him, the girls in the audience shrieking on cue. You could hear the quaver in his quiet words. The crowd sucked in their breath as he held the Best New Group trophy over his head and said, Penny, this is for you. So don't you dare tell me she coasted on his fame. Don't purse your lips, shrug your shoulders, belittle her good name. Stalker, barnacle, starfucker, Yoko. She heard it all over the years. But not once did she waver from the course they'd laid. Not for a moment did she doubt their ambitions or underestimate the price that would have to be paid. Can you imagine what she did for him? The excuses she made up, the distractions she provided, the shortcomings and the drugs she hid for him. When he was picked up in Pittsburgh, who took the rap? When he wanted to fire their first manager, who made the tough phone call? Who let fall the axe? Weeks that she didn't see him. Sent their manager to the fishing pier, the Fleabag motels to make sure he was still alive. Long nights in our house on Azalea Path, waiting for him to come to bed, finding him passed out in the studio. She'd bathe his face, gently pull the needle from the vein, and in the morning she brought him black coffee and a bottle of Xanax to smooth over the burn. Who do you think revived him in Mexico City that time? The largest free concert ever held in Chapultepec Park, the triumphant kickoff of the Kids World Tour, the moment sweet San Diego boy became a global wonder. But long after midnight in the Four Seasons Hotel, she woke up with a start, the rising star next to her rigid and bluing. She knew without thinking what had happened. She knew there was no time to lose. She dragged him to the bathtub, ran the water deathly cold, and slapped him, pounded his back, parted his lips, and blew air into his lungs. And then she climbed into the water on top of him, squeezed his body to hers, and started to pray, babbling to a God of whom she'd never before asked a thing. A shiver, a cough, his glazed eyes fluttered open. It's fucking cold, he groaned at last, his lips trembling but slowly pinking. My indomitable mother took his chin in her hand and said, you won't escape me that easily, Brant. We started something, and we're going to finish it. And after all those years of struggle and hope, after climbing the mountain, half carrying him up the slopes, he left her alone, without warning, to stand helpless while his sail breached the horizon, shipwrecked in the suburbs, while her hero departed on his foolish final odyssey. But you didn't know any of that, did you, my friends? You'd heard she was crazy, his unpredictable femme fatale, not untalented, but definitely second tier. She'd lived in his limelight and inherited the farm. Such a well-dressed, merry widow, she probably drove him right to the brink. Oh, heartless jury, don't believe everything that you think.